We're going to talk about the battle between Hektor and Achilleus in Book 22. Quick review of Book 21 in the Theomachy. We saw Ares challenge Athena. Who won? Athena, by far, knocked him down over 9 leagues or 9 acres. Then Aphrodite tried to save him. She got hit in the breast by Athena. Athena 2, Trojan gods 0. We then saw Poseidon go against Apollo, but Poseidon sort of got in Apollo's head. He said, I don't even know why you're fighting for this Trojan side, seeing as Laomedon tricked you and me last time we were down here. You had to be a shepherd, I had to build a wall, and we both want to destroy, we want to destroy the Chian wall, but basically what Poseidon says is, I don't get why you're on the Trojan side. A Trojan tricked you and enslaved you for a year. You should be on the Achaean side. Apollo then seems to agree in a way. He says, well, just as the generations of leaves are on a tree, so are the generations of man. I'm not going to fight for man since man is so short-lived. I'm going to fly away. Artemis then gets angry at him, his twin sister, then gets a boxing on the ears by Hera, which is both harmful or both hurtful and humiliating because it's treating her like a child. And then we get to see Hermes, named Argefontes in this case, Argus killer, and we explained what that meant last time, go against Leto, but seen as Leto is a former lover/wife of Zeus, Hermes says, no, I'm not going to fight you because perhaps that could lead to negative consequences for me down the line. And one thing I just want you to draw your attention to is Hermes clearly thinking about the future and his future and the future of the gods when he refuses to fight against Leto? Is he showing the foresight that might have prevented this entire war from happening had, say, Paris or maybe even Menelaus or maybe even Helen had it? So, are we perhaps getting a small lesson from Homer? Perhaps the best way to keep conflict out of your life is to prevent it from whatting? It's to prevent it from happening in the first place, to prevent it from starting. Because once it starts, is it in your control anymore? Think of the Trojan War. No. Multiple people get invited to that party and you don't know what they're going to do ever. Ever heard of Romeo and Juliet? Well, that's supposedly a love story, right? Do you know what it's actually a story of? Conflict. And who it takes as victims once it sets out. And often it takes as victims both in ancient times as well as in Elizabethan times as in times now. Who often gets eaten by conflict? Older people or younger people? Often the young. And so is it more dangerous or less dangerous to be young? More, because it's easier to get into conflict, and when you become conflicted and you get into conflict with people, you do not know what is going to happen. In fact, we have a good illustration of that. Achilles recently had a conflict with Agamemnon. What was the ultimate consequence of that conflict, which he would have never, ever predicted, which he had a hand in producing himself? The death of Patroclus, his own best friend. The death of his own best friend. That's right. And so, excellent. I'm glad we got to that lesson. I didn't know that if we were going to get there today. All right. Now, we need to see the final fight. So, after Leto and Argefontes do not fight, we then get a change of scene to the Taikos, to the wall of Troy. Priam sees that Achilles is out on the battlefield killing everybody, and so he sounds the what? Everybody's dying on your side. What do you need to do? Retreat. He sees the Trojans are losing. He opens the city gates. And now, that would be a big problem. When he opens the city gates, if Achilles sees that opening, Achilles will lead the troops inside and destroy Troy. So we need a distraction. Luckily, Apollo seems to be back on the side of the Trojans, takes the form of one of the Trojans, and runs from Achilles. When Achilles, like a predator, or a bear, sees something run away from him, which sensors activated him? His attack systems. Yes, his predatory aggression systems. And so he chases, like a cat chasing a mouse, Apollo. This is all a very clever ruse. It actually reminds me quite a bit of, was there a time when a very powerful god got tricked by a very intelligent god to keep him from focusing on something happening down on the battlefield? Can somebody tell me when that happened? Yes?
When Hera tricked Zeus.
When Hera tricked Zeus into not looking down on the battlefield so that who could help the Achaeans? Poseidon. And so twice now in this text, at least twice, we have seen that what defeats brute strength, either God or man? Intelligence. That's right. That's right. And that will be a big theme in the Odyssey. And I would even suggest, if you were like, Mr. Schmid, why is that theme in that book? That what this book is illustrating is how we as a people transitioned from thinking that brute strength was the ultimate way to win in battle and to form a community to the use of intelligence. And in fact, I would say that's a very old idea. Supposedly, we now have evidence that in chimpanzee troops, the chimpanzee alphas, they have an alpha structure, and when you have an alpha structure with mammals, the alpha gets all the ladies because he chases off all the weaker males. And so the alphas that are most successful amongst chimpanzees, and this is the weirdest thing, are not the strongest ones, but the ones that pay most attention to the social relations between the women and the children. And I think that's very interesting. So it's almost like even with chimpanzees, the more politically savvy leaders are the better leaders. And you might wonder, with humans, do you think it's the more intelligent leaders or the big, powerful, muscly, cruel leaders that do the best? It's like obviously the intelligent ones, right? Obviously the intelligent ones. Yes, very interesting. And so in the Iliad, we seem to be struggling with that idea. What makes you the best leader? Being the strongest, like who? Achilleus, or being the best at commanding troops like Agamemnon, or we might put off his side being the most capable or competent like who? Who's the most capable Achaean, who always gets the job done regardless of the job? Fighting, stealing, spying, yes? Odysseus, right. Okay, good. So Apollo distracts Achilleus in the form of Agenor. The Trojan forces are retreating. They are in a panic at this moment. Let's go. All right. Hector remains alone outside the walls as Achilleus realizes he has been tricked by Apollo. And Achilleus has some pretty hard words for Apollo there. He says something to the effect of, if you were a mortal, I would be sure to punish you for this, but you're not, so I'm not going to. Well, then we have what for students is a really quite a joyous moment. Because how many of you would be brave enough to admit that your mother had ever embarrassed you out in public before? Yelling at you, threatening you, saying something way too loud about you in the presence of someone that might hear about it. Oh my gosh, Mom. Well, here's a claim I'm going to make. Not a single one of you has been embarrassed by your mom in the way that Hector is about to be embarrassed in front of all the Trojan people. And all of you start to think, yeah, right, Mr. Schmid. You better produce some evidence for that. My mom's the most embarrassing person on the planet. How many of you are thinking that? Remember, there's no camera on the recording. Let the recording note that everybody raised their... I'm just kidding. Nobody raised their hands. They refused to. Okay. This is what Priam and Hecuba do. And I better be able to find this. Yes. Oh, yes. So I see what Priam is saying here. But I need to... yes. Okay. Priam and Hecuba plead with their son, urging him to come inside the walls and not face Achilleus alone. The old man, stretching his hands out, called pitifully to him. This is Priam, line 37 of book 22. Hector, beloved child, do not wait the attack of this man alone, away from others. You might encounter your destiny beaten down by Pelion, since he is far stronger than you are. And let's see, more. He says this. Yes. For old man, he's going to be... Okay, good. All right. So the old man spoke, and in his hands, seizing the gray hairs, tore them from his head. This is line 79. But could not move the spirit in Hector. And side by side with him, his mother in tears was mourning, and laid the fold of her bosom bare, with one hand held out a breast, and wept her tears for him, calling to him in winged words. Okay, she has taken a breast out of her dress and is holding it and is screaming at her son from the top of a wall with all the Trojans running inside of the gates. Hector, my child, look upon these and obey, and take pity on me, if ever I gave you the breast to quiet your sorrow. Remember all these things, dear child, and from inside the wall beat off this grim man. Do not go out as champion against him, O hard one, for if he kills you, I can no longer mourn you on the deathbed, sweet branch, O child of my bearing, nor can your generous wife mourn you, but a big way from us beside the ships of the Argives, the running dogs will feed on you. And so, I love sharing that bit with students. So, all of you, anybody been embarrassed by mom in that sort of way lately? Possibly not, right? So it's not so bad. At least maybe you can tell your mom that story. You can be like, at least you're better than Hector's mom. But, she's very scared for her son's life. And at least so I'm told, moms can have some pretty irrational, or do some pretty irrational things when they feel like their babies are being are threatened. And, that is that defensive aggressive system, aggressions kicking in. And I think we all know that our moms have that heavy. All right, in any case, Hector ignores their pleas. While in his own mind, he ponders his fate, wishfully imagining that it might be possible to make terms with Achilleus. Making terms meaning that hopefully Achilleus will give, if Achilleus beats Hector, which is almost undoubted that will happen, Hector wants Achilleus to give his body back to his family. If Achilleus gives his body back to his family, Hector can have an appropriate burial, and then even though it's a big deal that he dies, it's not that big a deal because he gets to die like a hero. Now, if Achilleus does what he's been threatening to do, and takes his body back and despoils it, and gives it to dogs, then Hector will never be buried. He will never have a hero's burial, a hero's mound. He'll never have a cult of the hero. His story will forever be disfigured by this dishonor by Achilleus, which is a big deal. But, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's see what happens. Hector has said that he is going to stand against Achilleus. But to stand against Achilleus is to attempt to stand against fate. And the moment that it actually happens is a very different moment from the moments when you first made the decision to endure it in the first place. And so, as Achilleus draws near, Hector is seized by fear. And this has often corrupted many students' perceptions of Hector. What he does is he literally runs away with Achilleus close behind. And well, again, we find a moment of doubt in Zeus. Just as Zeus felt a moment of doubt when his son Sarpedon was about to die, and he questioned whether he should allow fate to happen. He questions that again with great noble Hector. But Athena in this case, not Hera, convinces him, wisdom, to allow her to help Achilleus instead. So what Hector will do here is, and this is sort of a tough moment and something you're going to have to think about when you think about who Hector is Hector actually runs around Troy 3 times away from Achilleus. And the most beautiful simile in the entire book involves then the idea of a dream. And I might not be able to find it here right in this very second, but I can tell you what the dream, or what the phrase says. It says, just as in a dream, when a man approaches another but cannot catch him, so is that of Achilleus following Hector. And just as in a dream you flee from some source of threat and cannot escape it, so is Hector from Achilleus. I would say that's a good paraphrase. And let me see. Maybe I can find it here if I just look very, very close. It would probably take more than a second. Maybe if one of you wants to find it and look for it later, we can do that. In any case, Zeus weighs the destinies of both men in his scales, his golden scales. This is not the first time we've seen this. And Hector's, his fate weight is heavier, which means his day of destiny is come. And so, Athena then disguises herself as Hector's brother, Deiphobos. Remember Deiphobos, because he is going to be, here's a spoiler. After Paris dies, Deiphobos will be the man who marries Helen. Deiphobos will actually be the man who is married to Helen when Troy gets sacked. That means Deiphobos will be the man who endures the wrath of Menelaus when he catches him. And yes, we will see what the Achaeans do to Deiphobos when we get to the Iliad and see him in the underworld. And yes, they do some pretty horrific things to him. You might say just as the family of Priam tried to destroy tried to tear apart the family of Menelaus. So does Menelaus tear apart Deiphobos to get him back. And we'll talk about what that means soon. All right, so Athena disguises herself as Deiphobos. Deiphobos then offers himself as ally to Hector and says, "We two brothers can stand against Achilleus. At least if I stand against him with you, you will stand a chance." Hector agrees, stops running. This is obviously a ploy by Athena to do what to Hector? To make him stand one-on-one against Achilleus so that Achilleus kills him so that the fate of Troy will be sealed. And so, let's see what happens. Achilleus versus Hector. Well, if y'all have been wondering and waiting for a big-time fight that's going to take multiple pages and is going to be the most glorious fight in this entire book, you are going to be disappointed. Because that is not how it goes down. And in fact, that is not the point of this fight at all. It is a fast fight. It is not quick in any, or it is not, it does not take a long time, and it is not close in any way. It is a one-sided fight. It is a fast fight, and it is a fight where cheating happens on the side of the person who is already going to win anyway. And so, it's not a very satisfying conclusion to the text. And so, that might be a suggestion that from Homer, that conflict, though in our heads we may produce the idea that the ultimate conflict within a narrative is necessarily glorious, that may not be the case. It may be the case that sometimes conflict is also simply ugly. And so let's talk about this. So Hector stops and addresses Achilleus. He proposes before fighting that they agree that the winner will treat the loser's body with respect, correctly, as is custom. Well, unfortunately for Hector, is he even talking to Achilleus, the rational human, anymore? Or is he talking to the embodied force of rage, which now is possessing Achilleus like a demon possesses the soul of a sinner? Well, let's see what Achilleus says before we make that decision. Achilleus flatly refuses the deal. No way. And gives this famous simile. Just as, and this is a paraphrase, just as there can be no love between man and lion, natural enemies, nor wolves and lambs, so does Achilleus hate Hector. He says they're not even the same species of creature. A, is that correct? B, what does that tell you about Achilleus' thinking right now? Very correct and to the point, or very slanted and skewed? Slanted and skewed, of course. He is not seeing straight. He has not seen reality for what it is. You might even say that he's what? What is that term that we recently learned when we learned about the daughter of Zeus who was thrown from Olympus down to be an affliction on man for all time after she helped? Yes.
Delusion.
Delusion. Very good. It's almost like he's delusional. Yes. Well, he attacks. And his first cast missed. He throws a spear at Hector. His first spear totally misses. And then, this is always such an interesting moment, I think, in this battle. Athena then makes the missile, the spear, flip around and return right to the hand of Achilleus. And students always wonder why, because Achilleus is going to win anyway. Why would he need help? But then I suppose if you look at this situation from the other direction, it would be, that's just how hopeless this fight is. Even the gods are helping Achilleus beat Hector. His fate is sealed. Is there any hope for Hector at this moment? No. Even the hope he thinks he has is not real hope, because it's hope in his brother Deiphobos, who is not actually there. And so Athena is really closing the jaws of fate tightly on Hector. And well, Hector then throws a spear at Achilleus. We know that Achilleus has a very special shield with 5 layers of metal in it, which is much bigger and stronger than any shield that would have actually existed at that time. Hector's spear effectively bounces off of the shield, doing nothing. This is the moment of recognition for Hector. This is the moment when he realizes he's going to die. He turns to his side to ask his brother Deiphobos for another spear to throw at Achilleus. He turns to his side and sees what next to him? Nothing. who is going to come help him against Achilleus? No one. What can he do to stay the day of his destiny at this point? Nothing. He has to accept it. He has to accept his death before it happens, which you might imagine is one of the scariest things that a human has to do. After calling on Phobos in vain to provide another spear, Hector realizes that Athena has misled him, that what he thought was wisdom was not wisdom, and that the goddess of wisdom not only can tell you the truth, but can deceive you about the truth, as Pandaros knows as well. He realizes that he is all alone and that he is doomed. The fall of Hector. Now, Achilleus kills Hector and boasts aloud of his intention to mistreat Hector's body and says that he will never, ever ransom it back to Priam for proper funeral rites. The Achaeans then crowd around the corpse and all start to stab it together, even though they had no hand in killing it. They just, take this, Hector. See how strong you are now to defend against this. Achilleus then goes about making some small alterations to Hector's body in order to drag it back to the Achaean camp. So there's a place between the knob of your foot and the Achilles tendon where if you puncture it with a hole, you can loop a leather thong around the Achilles tendon and then drag a person. And that seems to be what Achilleus does here. He takes a piece of leather, he knobs 4 holes in the feet of Hector, loops this leather through, ties Hector to the back of his chariot. Not something that you would normally do or see. Keep in mind, he's also doing this in front of every single Achaean and every single Trojan who's on the wall. It is like the ultimate act of disgrace. Yes.
Is that supposed to be ironic because he gets shot there?
One might imagine that there is a certain irony there in the fact that he deals with the heels of Hector, and by story will himself be struck in the heel. Live by the sword, die by the sword. That theme's been coming up today. And so Achilleus drags the body back to the camp, and this is something important to note. Well, not important. This is important. This is something to note for your own trivia. Achilleus does not drag the body around Troy. He drags it back to the Achaean camp and around Patroclus' pyre. Though in the Aeneid, the claim will be made during a moment of ekphrasis, a picture on a wall of Juno in Carthage, that Achilleus does draw the body around Troy. But that's not what happens. And so just something for you to know from a trivia aspect. The body is dragged back to camp behind his chariot in an outrageous, sacrilegious, and utterly dishonoring and disrespecting act. You might consider this the most disrespectful thing that happens during the entire Trojan War. The most outrageous. The focus then shifts to the city, where we get the mournful reactions of Priam, Hecuba, and Andromache. Andromache's worst fears, which were imagined by her and Hector, are from Book 6, have now come to pass. And her lament is mostly about what a hard life now lies ahead for her fatherless son, Astyanax. And also we get the very famous quote from Hecuba where she talks about hating Achilleus so much that she wishes she could eat what raw from him? His liver. Yes, again, another idea of being so angry that you could cannibalize somebody. When was the last time, or who was the last person or god we heard about potentially being so angry that she might wish to cannibalize the Trojan people? She hated them so, yes? Hera, yes. Which is interesting too, because if you look at, say, like the modern taking of the host by those called Protestant or Catholic, that they seem to cannibalize the body of the Lord, but that's an act of love. So an interesting sort of Christian inversion on that theme. That which you eat, you usually hate because it was your enemy that you defeated and then consumed. That which now you love is that which you take into yourself and becomes part of you. Perhaps that's the idea behind a community, right? Or behind sharing of information. Sharing of information creates the ultimate community, and when you share information, you share all that which you love. Know and love. That's right. Okay. Achilleus then drags Hector behind his chariot. This is one of the most famous pictures, I would say, of Troy. You see Achilleus here shining with the light on him. Xanthos and Balios in front of him. Neither of them is the right color. One should be spotted. One should be brown. Both of these are black. They need to read their Iliad closer. You see several white horses behind him and everybody chasing after him. And Hector in sort of dark dust colors in the back there. Basically, when you look at this idea, it's almost as if everybody is trying to chase Achilleus in order to stop him, in order to make this stop. And so that will be sort of the idea behind the end of this story. How do we get Achilleus to come back to himself, give up this body, and return to the game as we know it, to return to normal, to return to reality? Yes?
Is the really tall guy with the really long spear Aias the Greater?
I've always wondered that. That's an excellent question. So there is a really large guy sort of staring at us here. I've often wondered whether that's supposed to be because there are 3 snakes on him as well. Agamemnon, because he sort of has a crown, or Aias the Greater. But if this were correct according to scale, for sure that would be Aias the Greater. And it does look a bit like him. You might also wonder whether it's like Zeus or Apollo as well, because that golden armor. It could also, I suppose, be who now has golden armor that we know has golden armor because of a foolish trade that was made with him. Diomedes. So excellent questions. Very good. All right, this is a base painting of Achilleus being dragged by Hector. Something you might notice is there are like 1 million legs for these horses. There are supposed to be 3 of them there. Sometimes why you see like faces turned in the wrong direction and the feet turned forward is they didn't know how to represent 3-dimensionally yet, so they had to make choices about which way people were turned. And if like their heads turned one way and the feet the other, how are you supposed to represent that? Very tough. And so you can see Achilleus here, you can see Hector. This is probably Iris, but maybe Athena, some goddess. Another god or goddess over here, possibly Hermes. Yes. Well, in any case. All right. Let me see. How much time do we have? I think what we have to do is this. Okay. We're going to give the last lecture tomorrow. We'll have the test on Wednesday.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.